What my daughter-in-law did not know was that the house she was sleeping in, the car she was driving, and the credit card she was maxing out every single week had never belonged to her son. They belonged to me. My name is Walter Briggs, and this is the story of how I gave my son and his wife exactly what they deserved: nothing. I built everything from scratch. That is not me bragging. That is just the truth. And if you are going to understand why I did what I did, you need to understand where I came from first. I grew up in a 2-bedroom house in Knoxville, Tennessee, with my parents and my 3 brothers. My father worked at a lumber yard 6 days a week. My mother cleaned offices downtown on the nights my father was home to watch us. We were not poor in the way that people romanticize poverty. We were just tired. All of us. All the time. Tired. I left home at 17 with $200 my mother had saved in a coffee can under the kitchen sink. She pressed it into my hands the morning I left and told me not to waste it on stupid things. I never forgot that. I put those $200 into a beat-up truck that I used to haul furniture for people on weekends while I worked a warehouse job during the week. By the time I was 25, I had a small moving company with 3 trucks and 6 employees. By 40, I had a logistics company with contracts across 4 states. By 55, I had sold that company for more money than my father made in his entire lifetime, and I had bought myself a house on 6 acres outside of Asheville, North Carolina, with a wraparound porch and a view of the mountains that made me feel like I had finally paid off some kind of debt I owed to the universe. My wife, Lorraine, died when our son Marcus was 19. Pancreatic cancer. She was gone in 4 months from the day they found it. Marcus took it hard. I took it hard. We both took it hard in different ways, and I think that is where I made my first mistake. I gave him everything after that. I did not know how else to show him that I loved him, that I was sorry his mother was gone, that I would do anything to keep him from feeling like he had lost both parents. So I gave him things. A car when he turned 20, an apartment when he graduated college, a position in my company before I sold it, even though he had not really earned it. I told myself I was being a good father. Looking back now, I was being a coward. I was paying him to forgive me for something that was not even my fault. Marcus married his wife, Deanna, when he was 28. She was pretty in a sharp, deliberate way. The kind of woman who always looked like she had somewhere more important to be. I tried to like her. I genuinely tried. There was a warmth I kept reaching for with her that was never quite there. She smiled at me in a way that did not reach her eyes, and she called me Walter in a tone that somehow made my own name sound like a mild inconvenience. In the first year of their marriage, Marcus came to me and asked if they could move into the big house with me. He said Deanna loved the property. He said it made more sense financially. He said it would be good for me not to be alone. I said yes. I told myself it was because I missed having family around. The truth is, I was still doing what I had always done, saying yes, because I did not know how to say no to my son. The first few months were fine. Deanna redecorated the guest wing without asking me. I said nothing. She hired a housekeeper and charged it to a card that was linked to my account. I said nothing. She started hosting dinner parties for her friends twice a month, spending what I can only describe as an alarming amount of money on food and wine and table settings she bought and never returned. I said nothing. Then their daughter was born. They named her Lily. And everything changed for me, not in a bad way. Not then. The moment I held that baby, I felt something come back to life in me that I had not realized had gone quiet. I was not just Walter Briggs, a retired man sitting on a porch watching the mountains. I was Lily's grandfather. She had my mother's nose and Lorraine's eyes, and she grabbed my finger the first time I offered it to her and did not let go. I would have done anything for that little girl. Deanna knew it. I think that is when things started to shift. Over the next 2 years, the spending got worse. Deanna had not worked since before the wedding, which I had accepted. But now the credit card statements were coming in at numbers that made my jaw tighten. $12,000 at a furniture boutique in Charlotte. $7,000 at a spa and resort in Sedona that she and her friends had visited without Marcus. A clothing allowance that she had apparently given herself that exceeded what I used to pay my warehouse manager in a month. Marcus said nothing. I would bring it up carefully, gently, The way you test ice before you step on it. And he would look at me with this expression that was somewhere between embarrassed and defensive, and he would say, "Dad, we're fine. You don't need to worry about it." As if the issue were my anxiety and not the number at the bottom of the statement. I started to feel it in small ways at first. The way Deanna would sigh when I sat in the living room while her friends were over, as if my presence in my own house were an imposition. The way she stopped including me in dinner plans, leaving a plate in the refrigerator with a sticky note as if I were a tenant. The way she talked about the property, our land, my porch, the garden Lorraine had started and I had kept going for 20 years as our home, with a particular emphasis on our that left no ambiguity about who she thought the our referred to. Marcus came to me one Saturday morning in early March. I was on the porch with my coffee. He sat down across from me, and he looked at his hands for a moment before he spoke. He said that Deanna felt I was too involved in their finances. He said she felt uncomfortable with the way I reviewed the credit card statements. He said they were adults, and they should be able to manage their own lives without me looking over their shoulders. He said this in a voice that sounded rehearsed, the way a child recites something they were told to memorize. I looked at my son. He was 41 years old and he could not meet my eyes. I asked him quietly whose name was on those credit cards. He did not answer. I asked him whose name was on the deed to the house. He looked at the mountain. I asked him where he thought the money came from that paid for the furniture in Sedona and the spa trips and the dinners and the housekeeper and the car Deanna had bought in November without telling me until after the fact. He told me I was being difficult. He told me I was controlling. He told me that Deanna had said, I made her feel like a guest in her own home. I set my coffee cup down. I told him I would think about what he said. What he did not know was that I had already been thinking. I had been thinking for 6 months. I did not react that day. I did not raise my voice. I did not tell him what I was feeling, which was a combination of grief and fury that I had not felt since the day the doctors told me about Lorraine. I went back inside. I made myself breakfast. I watched Lily play in the backyard through the kitchen window, chasing something across the grass, laughing at nothing, the way children do when the world is still simple. I called my attorney that afternoon. His name was Robert Caulfield, and I had known him for 20 years. I told him I needed to have a conversation about my estate. He said he would clear time on Monday. Over the next 2 months, I was very quiet. I was pleasant at dinner. I asked Deanna about her friends and nodded at whatever she said. I let Marcus talk about a business idea he had been half developing for 3 years, and I said it sounded promising. I played with Lily every afternoon, teaching her how to recognize birds by their calls, walking the property line with her on my shoulders, telling her the names of every tree. I was storing something up. I was getting ready. Robert and I met 7 times in those 2 months. We went through everything. The house, the property, the investment accounts, the trust structure I had set up years ago that Marcus had always vaguely known about, but never paid close attention to. We made adjustments, careful ones, legal ones, everything by the book. Everything documented. Then came the night that made it easy. It was a Thursday in May. I had come in from the garden and I could hear Deanna on the phone in the kitchen. I was not trying to listen. I was taking off my boots in the mudroom and her voice carried in a way she clearly had not anticipated. She was talking to someone, a friend, from the sound of it, and she was laughing. She said that the situation was honestly perfect. She said that I was old and I would not be around forever, and when I was gone, everything would finally be theirs outright. She said Marcus had already spoken to a financial advisor about liquidating the property once I was out of the picture. She used that exact phrase, out of the picture. She said they were going to sell the land and move to Charleston, and that she could not wait to be done with the mountains and the garden, and she paused here and lowered her voice slightly. Not quite enough. The old man following Lily around like she's his personal emotional support. I stood in the mudroom with one boot in my hand, and I felt something settle in me like concrete pouring into a mold and going still. I was not angry anymore. Anger had passed. What I felt was clarity. I finished taking off my boots. I went to my room. I called Robert and left a message telling him we were ready to move. The following 2 weeks I was careful and precise. I spoke to my bank. I restructured the accounts. The trust that Marcus believed he was a direct beneficiary of was adjusted legally, properly, with full documentation to reflect new terms that would require a 10-year period of demonstrated financial responsibility before any disbursement. The house, which had always been in my name alone, was not going anywhere. The credit cards linked to my accounts were closed, with 30 days' notice sent by mail per the terms of service, which I made sure arrived on a Friday afternoon. I arranged for a storage unit in town. Over 4 days, while Marcus and Deanna were out, I moved the things that mattered to me. Lorraine's photographs, my mother's coffee can, the records I had collected since my 20s, the tools from my workshop quietly into the unit or into the back of my truck. I did not take Lily anywhere she did not want to go. I want to be very clear about that. What I did for Lily was different, and it was not something I did in secret. 3 weeks before I made my move, I had a long conversation with my son about Lily's schooling. It was a real conversation, not a performance. I told him I had concerns about the instability in the household, the spending, the tension, the way arguments happened in front of her. I said this calmly. I said I wanted to discuss what was best for her. He dismissed me. He said I was overreacting. He said Lily was fine. I had already spoken to a family attorney separately from Robert. I had documented 17 months of financial records. I had a log dates, amounts, incidents that I had been keeping since the previous October. I had 3 recorded conversations, made in compliance with North Carolina's one-party consent law, in which Deanna had made statements about the property and about me that were relevant to the question of Lily's welfare. I left on a Tuesday morning in June. I had already reserved a long-term rental in a town about 40 miles east, a quiet place with a good school district. I drove away before 8 in the morning. I did not leave a note. Marcus called at noon. I did not answer. Deanna called twice. I let it go to voicemail. The message she left was not polite. When the credit card stopped working that afternoon, the accounts had been closed that morning at 9. Marcus called again. This time I answered. He asked me what was going on. His voice had an edge in it that he was trying to control. I told him I had made some changes. He asked what that meant. He said the cards had been declined. He said Deanna had tried to pay for something and it had not gone through. I told him that was correct. He asked me if I was serious. He asked if I had actually closed the accounts. His voice rose a little. I said yes. He asked where I was. I told him I was somewhere comfortable. There was a long silence. Then he said, in a voice I had not heard from him since he was a teenager pushing back against a curfew, "You can't just do this. This is our home. You can't just disappear." I told him the house was in my name. I told him Robert would be in touch regarding the formal terms of the property. I told him I loved him, and that I always would, and that I hoped he would take some time to think seriously about the last 2 years. He said things after that. I will not repeat them here. What I will say is that none of them surprised me, and none of them changed my mind. The legal process took 4 months. It was not pleasant. Marcus hired an attorney who sent letters suggesting that I had acted in bad faith and that my modifications to the trust were subject to challenge. Robert handled everything. The modifications had been made by a man of sound mind and full legal authority over his own assets, documented thoroughly, with no coercion and no ambiguity. Every challenge went nowhere. The house was listed in September. It sold in 6 weeks. I took no pleasure in that part. I had built that porch with my own hands. I had planted things in that garden that were still growing, but I had made my peace with it before I left, and I did not look back. What Marcus had not counted on, and what I suspect Deanna had also not counted on, was that the money from the sale did not go to them. It went into a separate trust I had established, with Lily named as the sole beneficiary, accessible to her at 25 with provisions for her education before that. It was her grandfather's money, set aside for her grandfather's granddaughter, and no one else was getting their hands on it. I sat across from Marcus and his attorney in Robert's office in October. It was the first time I had seen my son in person since June. He looked tired. Deanna was not there. He had come alone, which told me something. We sat in those chairs and the attorneys talked for a while, and then there was a quiet moment, and Marcus looked at me. Not the rehearsed look, not the defensive look. Something older and rawer than that. He looked like the boy who had stood at his mother's graveside and gripped my hand so hard it hurt. I did not look away. I told him I was not doing this to punish him. I told him I was doing this because I had worked too hard and loved him too much to watch him become someone his mother would not recognize. I told him the money would always be there for Lily. I told him the door to a relationship with me was not closed, but it had conditions now that it had not had before, and those conditions were respect and honesty, and him deciding for himself what kind of man he wanted to be, rather than letting someone else make that decision for him. He did not say anything for a long time. His attorney said something technical, and Robert responded. Papers were signed. When we stood to leave, Marcus stopped at the door. He did not turn around. He said, very quietly, that he had not known about what Deanna said on the phone. The comment about me being out of the picture. He said he had found out later. He said he was sorry. I told him I believed him. I told him that was a start. I have a 2-bedroom apartment now in a town called Black Mountain, 20 minutes from a park where Lily and I go on Saturday mornings when Marcus drops her off. He started doing that 3 months ago, voluntarily, without any legal arrangement requiring it. He shows up at 9, and Lily runs across the parking lot in her little rain boots, regardless of the weather, and she grabs both my hands and tells me everything that happened to her that week, all at once, in no particular order, the way children tell stories when they trust you completely. We walk the trails. We look for birds. I tell her the names of trees. Marcus sits in the parking lot for a while before he drives away. Sometimes I see him watching us through the windshield. I do not know what he is thinking. I hope it is something that is slowly turning into something better. I am 67 years old. I grew up in a house where my mother kept $200 in a coffee can under the kitchen sink because that was all there was between her family and nothing. I built something out of that inheritance. Not just money, a way of being in the world, doing the work, keeping your word, not borrowing against tomorrow what you cannot pay back today. I tried to give my son that. I gave him too much of everything else and not enough of that. That is on me, and I carry it. But I am also still here. I am on the right side of the ground, which my father used to say was all that mattered on any given morning. I have my coffee. I have the mountains. I have a little girl in rain boots who grabs my hands and does not let go. Some lessons cost everything. Some of them are still worth learning.